Welcome to Silicon Valley Successes. We interview experts and entrepreneurs to give the world access to the knowledge and experience that is here in Silicon Valley. Our mission is to create opportunities for those who seek them and help you to become the next Silicon Valley success.
Welcome to Silicon Valley Successes. So over the last few weeks, we've talked with investment bankers, we've talked with marketing experts, we even talked to a founder of an amazing startup here in Silicon Valley. Now, today we have two guests, Mary and Carlos, who work with startups to help them find office space or to help them get from their garage or their living room to a physical location. But I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit more. Mary, could you first introduce yourself and then Carlos?
Sure.
Yes. Hi, good evening, Sean. Thank you for inviting us to your show.
Oh, no, thank you. It's my honor. Yeah. Thank you.
So my name's Mary Blazer, and I'm a commercial real estate agent. I work for Newmark Knight Frank, formerly Newmark Cornish & Carey. So Cornish & Carey was a boutique firm here in Northern California. We merged with Newmark Knight Frank. So we're now in about 6 continents with over 400 offices. So it's given us a bigger global platform to be able to service clients. Especially those clients that are startups coming from foreign countries that need to come here in the Bay Area and establish, working opportunities for themselves for their startup businesses. And I've enjoyed a 30-plus career, and my specialty is the leasing and sales of office and industrial properties here in Silicon Valley.
Wow, Carlos, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sean. My name is Carlos Serrano Kwan. I'm the managing director of Realcommercial Real Estate, and we were formed last year with a partnership between Joy Holdings as well as AGI Capital. And so we specialize in leasing, tenant representation, as well as landlord representation. We have offices in Burlingame, Palo Alto, and San Francisco as well.
Okay. So to start, let's have a quick question for you.
Sure.
So what issues do startups face when they're looking for office space?
Well, some of their issues are that it's hard for them to figure out how fast they're potentially going to be growing. So finding that right size space is initially a concern for them.
Okay.
You could lease a space that potentially is too small, that doesn't have enough breakout rooms. You create more noise, and then it creates some inefficiencies with how you flow in that space.
Okay.
Or you could take a space that's potentially too large, and then you've just got all these overhead costs that you're paying for that you don't necessarily need. So I think finding that right size space for startups and assisting them in that effort is something that's pretty critical for a startup company.
So with that right size space, say I had a team of 4 people or 6 people right now, and I came to you, is that too early to talk to someone, or is that the right time, or when should that first conversation be?
That time is an important time because there are small spaces that can still accommodate that size team of people.
Okay.
And then it's just determining from that point on, at what future point are you going to double your size or triple your size. So when you're looking for space, you might want to be thinking about how long of a term you're going to be in that one first space.
Okay.
That'll last you through that period of time, and then moving on to the next.
So with that, I'm just going to keep going with this one question just because there's so much to it. From one term to the next, is that a normal 6-month, 1 year? How flexible is that?
So for some of the Regis centers, executive suites, places where you can rent on a month-to-month basis, you could probably do something short-term. Most landlords in typical office space, I'd say that the minimum terms are about a year. Generally, they would like a longer-term lease, but if they've got the ability to move and expand tenants within their building or their project, then some landlords are typically a little bit more flexible than others. It just depends on the size. But as far as term, it just really depends, too, on which landlord in the valley you're dealing with.
So would the landlord in the valley be flexible if they know you're a startup or not?
Oh, yes.
They would?
Sure.
Oh. And Carlos, have you had this same experience with issues that startups might face when looking for an office space?
Sure. In my experience, it's really about the right location to attract the right talent, as well as be in the vicinity where their investors may be as well. So for example, I know that talent acquisition for startups is really challenging. And so they need to be in an area where transportation to their location is actually very attractive to a lot of their future employees, their current founders, and teams of that nature, because they have to get together frequently. So it could be something near BART, something near Caltrain. It could be anywhere from San Francisco to Palo Alto, but it has to be somewhere where it's easily accessible or something like that. But also to be in an area where their investors can easily go to, so where they do pitch events, etc., and that sort of thing is a really big consideration as well.
So when you're showing potential locations to startups, do you actually tell them that? Do you say, this office is available, and nearby are frequent pitch events, nearby are these VCs or these angel groups, that's why this office space might be a good fit for you?
Yeah, I think that's where we can be helpful as brokers to the businesses, as well as the type of business that they may have. It could be a blockchain, it could be a real estate tech startup, it could be anything other startups that we are familiar with the community, and we know our own group of investors might be interested as well, and they get excited when they hear that we know what their needs are.
Yes, and one of the things our firm can do is we can tour them in the markets, but we can also show them aerial maps of what companies are located in the areas of where they are potentially looking to go. So, if they're trying to interview or recruit people potentially from other competitive companies, they'll know where they'd like to potentially be located.
Yeah.
So if I was a startup and I knew I wanted engineers from maybe Google or Facebook, I would come to you and you go, oh, well, if you want to recruit from these companies, a good office building potential might be in this area, because they're already used to making that commute every day, and going to your office wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Right.
That's fast. I've never heard that before.
And also, they're looking at the demographics too of where their employees technically live, and how close they're going to need to be in proximity to where they want to work. So that's another important. We can do. We can run demographic studies for them by zip code. If they give me their where each of their employees live, we can kind of map it out for them.
Really?
So they can also, from another perspective, try to find a location that suits everyone's needs.
So I have 6 employees, for example, and I would come to you and go, we need to move out of my apartment to an actual location right now. You would tell me, this is where your next hires might come from, these companies. This is where your current employees live, and this would be the best commuting routes. What other information could you give me?
Well, go ahead, Mary. I mean, what I would really give them is help them prepare for a potential space that they're interested in. They may not know that it requires financial qualifications, as well as a business plan, as well as a personal guarantee, because the landlord is looking for a tenant that's really qualified and fits in their building. So it's a lot of preparation work that you have to do with a startup, and they might not be aware of. They think they might be just like signing a residential lease, but it's quite different. It's more of a business relationship, and it's a fit with the building as well.
Can you go into more detail about that? And Mary, if you'd like to add, because I really have no idea about this business relationship. Please tell me more about it.
Well, from a business relationship perspective, we have our fellow brokers, and that we do a lot of work with. We have the ownership of buildings that we have relationships with, and other real estate professionals. So we have sort of this inside track on what's happening, and we're on the pulse of the market. So when these companies come along and they're looking for space, we know, for example, a space that may have just been vacated, or something that's maybe going to come to the market that's not technically being marketed and available to just the public.
And that's because you know the owner of that building or the landlord, and you know the last person's lease ends 6 months from now or a year from now.
Right. So we're, that's our job, to be real estate, to know what's going on in the market so that we can service these clients to the best of our ability. And I think that it definitely helps to add value, because when you think about these decision makers of these companies and how much time they're trying to put into running their startup, it's a lot of time and communication in trying to identify properties in the market. So if you're reaching out to professionals like Carlos and I to help them identify the properties that could be well located and suited, and help them with understanding all these business points that need to be negotiated and discussed, it'll help save them a lot of time and effort.
Now, is it different from a startup coming from another state to Silicon Valley versus another country to Silicon Valley? What types of problems or situations do the different startups, depending on where they come from, face when they come to Silicon Valley?
I think it's pretty much the same thing. I think it's the expectation of um, what the landlord requires of them. I mean, a lot of them, for example, I experience with folks that are doing drones, so they have big, large propellers, or some of them that are doing robotics that need space where they can go down the aisle and these type of things, and they don't know what locations will allow that kind of a usage. So there's certain type of usage, for example, PDR,
PDR?
production distribution repair,
Okay.
or some of the industrial kind of zoning and warehouses that can actually have offices in there as well. So these are the type of usages that some of these startups will require, and your typical office won't have that type of availability. So
Right. So, for example, a client like that might go into an R&D facility as opposed to an
R&D
office.
facility? What's the
you know,
difference
an
between that and an office?
research and development.
Right.
Okay.
And so, in those types of buildings, you're going to have power requirements that are going to be different than your typical office building. So, with their technology, they may need, for example, some higher amperage in power,
Okay.
400 amps or up to 1,000 amps. It just depends what they need, but that's up to us. You know, we need to ask those questions and help them figure out what their needs are from that perspective. Clear height
Right,
Ah.
high
in a
ceilings,
building, high ceilings,
roll-up doors, that sort of
dock
thing.
high doors for deliveries.
So
So-
how much do you actually have to know of the startup, what they're doing, their product, what they're working on, in order to give them the best option for them?
Well, we
That's a really good question, actually, because what I do, Mary, is I actually go visit them first. I make sure they're qualified, first of all, and then they say who they are, they say, because I will, on behalf of the landlord, the owner of the building, I actually have to go do a site visit of where they're currently located, if they have a current location, understand their operation, and see if it's a fit for them, or what's a fit.
Interesting. Mary?
So, I'm sorry, I just.
Oh, not a problem. So back to the startups themselves. When you interview them, how do you know that they're financially qualified or a fit for that landlord? Is it they're about to raise their next round of funding, they have money in the bank, or they're talking to investors? Kind of what stages could they be at for them to actually have a serious conversation? And do you turn any companies down?
Typically, I tell my clients that these landlords are looking for a profit and loss sheet, a balance sheet, an income statement,
For the last 3 months?
usually for the last 2 years, but they don't have 2 years worth of that kind of information, but whatever they can provide. So their angel investing, who their backers are.
Okay. So if you had
if-
some big name backers or an angel group
That
or
would-
VCs, that helps a lot.
Right, and also if they have money in the bank so that they can show they've got so much cash in a bank account that they can support. Landlords just want to make sure they're going to pay their rent
Okay.
for whatever obligation of term that they have. Because, you know, a lot of startups burn through cash. They've got a high burn rate. So the landlords just want to make sure that, because they're investing in that company, when you think about it,
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's money that they're generating every month. And so they want to make sure they're going to pay their bills. And then there's personal guarantees that are often asked for
Okay.
from startups.
So with that personal guarantee, say I'm the founder of the company, is it me and my whole team that's guaranteeing? Is it just me and the other co-founder? Is it me? Like, what's the guarantee on?
It's usually a personal guarantee. It could be a person who's one of the corporate officers who would be willing to guarantee the lease. People are not always that inclined to want to do that and put their own assets on the line. So sometimes they'll ask for a letter of credit, or an increased security deposit is another option.
Right.
So, you know, they really want to just try to cover upfront costs like commissions, tenant improvements, any sort of concessions that have been given to these startup companies.
Can you tell me about the tenant improvements, exactly what that is? And before answering that, I just wanted to make another statement. If you want more information on this or any other topics we've covered, please visit us at SiliconValleySuccesses.com. Once again, that's SiliconValleySuccesses.com. All right, back to you. So what's tenant improvements?
Tenant improvement is really the criteria and the preparation of the space for the tenant to operate in their own business operations. So it's a matter of, for example, putting up walls, putting up offices, conference rooms. It could be a kitchenette. It could be something like that. So it really up to the specs and design of the tenant. And then that will be negotiated with the landlord who pays for what. how much of free rent that they can get, and this is where the brokers come in, and they can negotiate that on behalf of the tenant and the landlord.
So the broker can come in and you go to the broker, listen, I want 1 month free rent or 3 months free rent. What's common, or what areas can a broker negotiate for the landlord or the tenant?
Well, in a tight market where the rents are really high and it's very competitive, landlords can call the shots. If they don't want to give free rent, they don't have to give free rent. In a softer market, I would say 1 month of free rent for every 2 years, or 2 months of free rent for a 3 to 5 year type term.
But that would be with a
standard.
big corporation though, right? I mean, just a startup. What's a typical startup lease? 6 months, a year, 2 years?
I would say about a year.
Yes, about 12 months. So.
Okay. And if, say, 11 months in, the startup goes, we're going to have to file for bankruptcy, sorry, and that personal guarantee, I really have no money because I spent all on the startup. What happens then?
Well, we as brokers can help to market the space and try to get another tenant to backfill and take that obligation off of the tenant. Technically, they're still obligated until we can, re-let the space. We can tell the landlord may have another tenant because they do a lot of marketing as well. Some of them, they may have someone that might want to just backfill that space. So it's just really getting the word out and trying to help these people and make it as painless as possible.
Do landlords ever go to tenants and go, listen, I have someone else that wants to pay more than what you guys are currently paying. I'll give you some money if you leave.
That's happened.
It could happen, yeah.
That's
But a lot of times what happens now is that, the climate is very kind of like unpredictable. So you have a lot of tenants that are either downsizing or they are expanding. And so they need new space. They might want to abandon the current space, so we can help sublease that space as well.
Okay.
And if they need to leave it early, then we can help them sublease that space as well. So it really determines a lot of communication between us brokers and the tenants. And the landlords might fill us in as well.
So how often should the tenant be talking to you? Is it like every 3-4 months, or is this monthly?
I recommend it because I put a client in a space back in October, and by May of the following year, we were looking for a new space, and they had signed a 1-year lease obligation. So every couple months is a good idea to be just on the pulse with them.
So you'd say your broker is actually part of your team, almost like your lawyer, your accountant, or your bookkeeper, that one guy always there looking for that next or space for you.
Well, yeah, and it's all about relationships, and you want to start early on having these relationships that hopefully build into longer future relationships and growth that you're helping them to achieve. Because I've had a client that started small in about 1,200 square feet. I then expanded them to like 5,000 square feet.
Wow.
Then they moved to 15,000. Now they're in 30,000. It's just a great success story. So you love when you can stay on that path with them and be in touch with them and help them in their growth, especially with the amount of people that they're bringing on, and their space needs drastically change when they get to those levels of needing bigger space.
Can brokers also make other introductions to them, maybe to investors or potential business partners, or do brokers ever reach out to their personal network and say, hey, I have this startup here I'd like to introduce you to? Has that ever happened?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, for me, I do, because I take an interest in the tenant. I take an interest in the company because I've learned a lot through the process of helping them qualify. And then in that process, I actually asked them, you guys need help with funding? When's your next event? Would you like to be close to another type of tenant or a type of investors? Because we'll know who's in the building or who's nearby. And so I like to connect them and make sure that they're also successful in their business, hopefully. We play a role in that because a successful tenant will be a successful future business, and they might grow, and we can help them there as well. And then the landlord will also help out because they'll know that they want their tenant to be financially successful, so they can grow and take care of their property.
So can a tenant in negotiation ever ask, say, hey, we don't have money, we want to give you equity in our company? Does that come up a lot?
That came up in the early 90s when I was working for Prologis and some other companies.
Tell me a story there.
No, I just know that that's been a discussion. It's not something that they would always do.
Okay.
But potentially that came up quite a bit.
Does that happen now, though? You said back in the .com time, but
I think landlords are a little more cautious because they could have been burned in the past with a lot of that. And they may have new guidelines too that that's not really their core business, so they should just be doing what they're supposed to be doing and not investing necessarily in their tenant's business. But I know that some do.
So there's some, you got to understand, there's some that are smaller landlords that may take a risk. There
Yeah.
are big landlords, like institutional guys that have multiple tenants in their office building. That probably is not going to happen.
Right.
Okay, interesting. So some of our viewers are overseas in countries such as China and Korea, all over the world. How is it different for them when they come to Silicon Valley? What questions should they be asking? I mean, they don't have a U.S. credit history. They may not have a credit history at all, depending on where they're from. How did they go about finding a location?
Well, they partner up with folks like us who can help identify where they would like to be, and this is after we find out more about them and more details about them. But I have a group I'm working with right now, and it's just investigation as you go, day by day. Because sometimes you're dealing with them on a whole different time frame. Like I'm having conference calls at 9 o'clock at night, which is like their morning, or you know. So you just try to accommodate and figure out what they're looking for, and when they're here, ask them as many questions as you possibly can on how are you established already? Are you a California corporation? Have you incorporated yet? What's the process that you're going about right now in terms of how you're going to finance this operation? And
so if I'm a company from, we'll say Ukraine, from Unit City, from Matt's area, who was a guest earlier, and I come to Silicon Valley, from day one, I found a location. How long does it take from when I decide the location, or when I connect with you to start looking for a location, to sign a lease, to be able to move in? Like, can this be done in a month, or is it a lot longer, a lot shorter?
Yeah, I don't think a month will do it, in my opinion, depending on how ready the company is overseas.
Okay.
Because I work with a lot of companies overseas that just not aware of what the due diligence requirements from a landlord to a tenant are. And a lot of landlords, since you're coming from overseas, that level of trust is not as strong as a local company.
And it takes them time because they're traveling back and forth, and when they're here they're seeing things, but then they go back and then they're reporting their directors, and then maybe those folks need to come out and see the property, and there's a lot of back and forth that initially could happen in the first 2 to 3 months of helping this client even identify space.
So
in
you'd
the market.
recommend an overseas founder, one of the people on his team, to come to Silicon Valley, meet a broker, build that relationship on maybe trip 1. Trip 2 comes, see a few locations. Trip number 3, kind of make the decision, and then trip 4. I mean, is that a normal process?
That's pretty normal. Yeah, and I would say anywhere from 2 to 6 months. But it depends how large of a company you're dealing with too. And sometimes you can find a space immediately if it's, if it's a smaller space and you've got some
A-round company, 10 employees, 20 employees,
yeah,
something like
you've
that.
got plenty of options. It may not take too long. But you get into some bigger size requirements, and then you want to give yourself a longer window.
Do anyone from overseas come here with completely off the wall expectations? I want this office, I'll pay this much, and you go, I'm sorry, that's the price of a chair. Do you ever come across that?
I do. I mean, it's not way off, but it's more like, they send somebody else that's not really in the real estate or tenant the space acquisition environment. They may send somebody from marketing or something, and they may not know what the landlord is expecting or how to work with a broker. So there's a lot of back and forth, and we try to help them prepare by telling them that we need access, or the landlord needs to look at your financials and your business plan and that sort of thing. And so they have to be ready to provide that kind of material.
Is there any vocabulary they should know, price per square foot, or things like that if they know before meeting you could save a lot of time?
Well, a lot of time we're educating them on these buzzwords like TI.
What's TI?
Tenant improvement.
Okay.
And sometimes we just say, what kind of TIs are you looking for? And they don't know. It's a tenant improvement. Okay. And that's important because one client of mine wanted a lab within their part of their R&D operation.
Wow.
So then I was asking them about the kind of power that they might be, power needs that they might have, and he wasn't so sure about that. So that's pretty critical, because if you're going to have a lab component, you may need 200 to 400 amps of power in your space. So it's important because then now he'll go back and ask the key questions that he needs to be able to.
Do you ever
know.
give potential tenants a list of questions and just say,
Yes.
answer all these before the next time we talk?
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
What advice would you give a founder out there that hasn't found any office space yet, that's still working at home, on when they first talk to landlords, or what they should be thinking of, other than what we've already talked about so far? We've talked about location of your employees, we've talked about transportation, we've talked about lease options, we've talked about talking to brokers who can make introductions, and this is all amazing. What's more to know?
Another thing that I like to do is recommend a good business attorney.
Oh,
Because as you know, we're here to help with this lease process from start to finish. But when you get into the business points of the lease agreement on what you've negotiated in terms, there's also the boilerplate language within the lease. And if you're a foreign company here, or you're not really familiar with a lot of lease language,
okay.
I highly advise that they use business attorneys to review this documentation, because we're not attorneys.
Yeah.
We help negotiate these deals, but to protect them, that's just an important part. Do you have a business attorney? Do you need a reference to a good local real estate attorney?
Have you seen anyone that, because they didn't have an attorney, got in some hot water later on?
Not too much hot water, but
Not really hot water,
Not
but
water,
it's just something that they, it's not easy language for them to review on their own.
yeah.
Okay.
And so they should have a second pair of eyes to take a look at that and what their needs are.
And Carlos, what advice would you give to a founder before you met them? Any information you wish to pass on to someone?
As far as leases are concerned, it's mostly to think about the strategic location where they want to be, and if it fits their needs. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, I think that a lot of them may think that they need a certain thing, but a lot of times it's better for them to be in a shared environment, or maybe find somebody that has a complementary type of business with them that they can go in together. That might provide some synergy to them, and you can make those kind of introductions as well.
That's great. And Mary, before time runs out, could you
Yes.
please talk about how people can contact you, and a little brief overview of yourself one more time?
Sure. So again, Mary Blazer. I'm with Newmark Knight Frank, and folks can reach me at my email, which is mblazer@ngkf.com. We have our company website, www.ngkf.com, as well.
Carlos?
Carlos Serrano Kwan. My number is 415-608-8409, and we have dedicated tenant representation agents in my firm. So
That's great. So Mary, Carlos, I want to thank you guys for taking the time, coming here on Silicon Valley Successes. And people at home, for further information, please visit our website, siliconvalleysuccesses.com. Check us out on YouTube, Facebook, and all the other social mediums. And we hope that you got a lot out of this. And in the future, we're going to have more guests from investment bankers, bookkeepers. We have some amazing founders coming up in the next few episodes. So we look forward to your future attendance. And thank you again for taking the time to watch.
Thank you from all of us at Silicon Valley Successes. We hope you found the information presented today useful in your path to success. For further information on accessing the resources in Silicon Valley, you may visit us on the web at siliconvalleysuccesses.com, on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you. And remember, we want to help you in your journey to become the next success.